I woke up to the hiss of air escaping from tires and the sharp chemical sting of spray, paint still hanging in the morning heat. My Porsche sat gutted in the driveway. All four tires slashed like a warning, and a fat red X sprayed across the windshield. I didn't move at first, just stood on the porch barefoot, coffee going cold in my hand, staring at what looked like a hate crime against German engineering. At the curb, a cheap clipboard leaned against my mailbox with a typed-up notice shoved in its clip. Property violation. Community enforcement. Phase 1. No signature. No contact. Just those 3 words that meant someone thought they had power here. It wasn't a robbery, not a random act. This was a message. The problem was they sent it to the wrong guy. I moved to this neighborhood to stay off-grid, blend in, disappear behind hedges and neutral colors. After 15 years in the field, I'd learned how to ghost through the world, live quiet. No red flags, no paper trail. The Bureau let me go with a clean file and a handshake, and I kept it that way. Until now. I was supposed to be retired, just a guy with a fast car and a quiet past. But this wasn't HOA drama. This was a signal flare. I read the violation again. Reflective surfaces exceeding visual compliance. Unauthorized camera placement. Improper curb alignment. This wasn't about a car. It was bait. Someone was poking the fence, trying to see what lived inside. I already knew who. Karen Simmons, self-declared queen of the HOA and local tyrant in yoga pants. I'd seen her prowling the sidewalks like she owned the soil, clipboard glued to her chest like body armor. She smiled with her teeth, but not her eyes. And her eyes always landed on me. Every new notice felt more like an interrogation than a regulation. But I ignored her. That was my first mistake. The second was thinking she didn't know who I was. Most of these HOA types were harmless. Retired dentists, overworked moms, bored ex-realtors with too much printer ink. But Karen played the game like she'd written the rules. I started watching back. Trail cams went up disguised as bird feeders. Motion sensors hidden in lawn ornaments. My house turned into a surveillance bunker with petunias out front. I logged every car that passed twice, every stranger who lingered, every trash bin that got touched but not emptied. It didn't take long before the pattern formed. Late-night footsteps, mismatched tire tracks near my fence, someone flashing a light at my attic window from the woods past midnight. I stopped sleeping more than 3 hours at a time. The last time I felt this hunted, I was in Budapest tracking a foreign asset who used school buses for cover. That ended with a rooftop extraction and 2 blown knees. Now I was chasing shadows in a cul-de-sac. But the rules hadn't changed. Find a pattern. Follow the trail. End the threat. Karen wanted a war. She just didn't know the kind of man she picked a fight with. This wasn't over a car or curb color or lawn height. This was planned, coordinated. The slashed tires were the opening shot. The clipboard was just the start, because 3 hours later, a letter slid under my front door with no return address. Just a single line in bold type. You are non-compliant. And I realized this wasn't harassment. It was an operation, which meant I wasn't just going to defend myself. I was going to dismantle whatever machine she'd built, piece by piece, before it spread to the next house on this block. 3 nights later, the cameras picked up motion behind the backyard fence, just before 2 a.m. A tall figure in a dark hoodie crouched low, moving with the kind of care that told me they weren't drunk teens or petty thieves. I watched from the shadows inside my living room, tracking the grainy footage on the monitor. The figure paused near the shed, scanned the yard like they were checking for traps, then pulled something from their pocket, an envelope. They didn't stuff in the mailbox or tape it to the door like before. This time, they slid it under the back door like they knew the layout of my home. And then they disappeared without a trace. I waited a full hour before stepping outside, just in case someone was still watching, still testing me. The envelope was thick, almost too neat. Inside were photographs, shots of my home from multiple angles, some during the day, others at night. Zoomed in through windows, peeking past curtains. One of them even showed my reflection holding a mug in the kitchen. It wasn't surveillance. It was exposure. Someone wanted me to know they could see everything, every corner, every movement. I flipped the last photo. Scribbled on the back was another line, same bold font as the last letter. Non-compliant assets will be processed. I didn't report it to the police. That would have invited too many questions, too many eyes. Instead, I pulled the old field case from under the floorboards in the master bedroom, the one I swore I'd never touch again. Inside was a burner laptop, secure drives, signal jammers, and a folder labeled Domestics, Low Threat, High Complexity. It was a kit for dealing with people who operated under the radar: neighborhood power players, civilian watchdogs, grassroots manipulators. The people who built regimes without a flag. Karen fit the profile too well. The more I dug, the more it unraveled. Her so-called HOA wasn't listed on any official city record. There was no meeting history, no elections, no tax trail. Yet somehow she had a budget, branded safety vests, even laminated regulation guides. I traced the origin of the first flyer. The QR code linked to a basic website with cookie-cutter compliance language. But when I probed deeper, the domain pinged through a data server in Arlington, Virginia. Federal territory, usually tied to dormant intelligence assets or shadow testing programs. That's when I knew Karen wasn't alone. She wasn't just inventing rules for power. She was being backed, maybe even trained. I started mapping out every home that had one of her signs on the lawn. 6 in total, all on one loop of the street. All recent sales within the last 2 years. Quiet families, polite couples, the kind that didn't draw attention. But they all shared something else. Security systems that weren't commercial brands, privacy tinting that blocked thermal cameras, and satellite dishes that didn't face the right direction. This wasn't just about me. This was a cell, a planted pocket of controlled territory inside suburbia. And my home? The last one she didn't control. That explained the slow invasion. The tire slashing was only an attempt to provoke me. The photos, the midnight visit, all just ways to push me into reacting. Because that's what they needed. A reason. A trigger. If I exploded, she could brand me hostile, uncooperative, dangerous. Then she could initiate the next phase of whatever operation this really was. And the public? They'd buy it. After all, I was the angry loner with the sports car and the cameras. Easy to spin. So I stayed ahead. I installed 3 silent alarm systems of my own, designed to ping my burner phone only if tripped in a specific sequence. No sirens, no flashing lights, just quiet data. I also used my credentials, still semi-active in a buried bureau archive, to request access to behavioral surveillance records tied to neighborhood incidents. What I found shocked me. In the last 8 months, 3 homeowners in the county had filed HOA-related complaints that resulted in unexpected property seizures, emergency code enforcement, or voluntary relocation. All of them cited Phase 2 protocols in the paperwork. That language didn't exist anywhere in civilian legal code, but I had heard it before. Used in test documents for psychological operation simulations, crafted to simulate pressure under artificial authority. Karen had taken those playbooks and converted them into suburban warfare. Her laminated flyers were just the surface. Below them was a real system, phased, funded, and expanding. Then came the morning I found the black SUV idling at the end of the cul-de-sac. Windows tinted too dark, plates coated in a matte finish, engine humming with the low rumble of a turbocharged plant. It didn't move for over 40 minutes. When I finally walked down the drive, the SUV pulled away, not fast, not frantic. Smooth, like it was on schedule. A minute later, a message buzzed on my burner. No number, just a pop-up with GPS coordinates and a timestamp. My house, my porch, my current position, marked with a red dot. They were tracking me now. This had moved past intimidation. This was escalation. Surveillance. Active tagging. Probably biometric if they'd come close enough with a device. I scanned the bushes, trees, rooftops. No drones. But something was watching. Something that wanted me not just out, but broken down and isolated first. I recognized the play. It was from our own training materials. The twist came later that evening, when my neighbor across the street, Mr. Jensen, retired teacher, always mowed his lawn at 7 a.m., walked over like nothing was wrong. He offered me cookies. I almost didn't take them, but then I noticed the shape of something tucked into the napkin. A flash drive. He didn't say anything, just nodded once and left. I closed the door and plugged it into my burner. What I saw changed everything. Security cam footage. Not mine. His. It showed two men in vests entering my backyard the night my tires were slashed. One stood watch while the other did the damage, then marked something under my mailbox with chalk. The camera also picked up Karen standing at the street corner, not far, holding her phone up like she was recording the whole thing. She wasn't just organizing. She was directing. And worse, she was building narrative. I wasn't the target. I was the story she needed to push whatever plan this was to the next level. They weren't trying to scare me off. They were trying to provoke a storm. 3 days after the flash drive, a yellow envelope appeared in my mailbox, hand-delivered, with no postage. Inside was a single sheet printed with Karen's signature at the bottom, but the contents weren't HOA policies or warnings. It was a formal notice of community reassignment protocol, citing violation clusters and behavioral risks. At the bottom was a classification I hadn't seen before. Subject code 117, R, Tier 3, relocation candidate. This wasn't HOA language anymore. This was intelligence-grade phrasing. My hands tightened around the paper, not out of fear, but out of recognition. I'd signed off on documents that looked just like this back when I worked counter-threat strategies for deep cover programs. They weren't trying to evict me. They were trying to deconstruct my presence, socially, psychologically, and physically. Phase 3. Infiltrate, isolate, then replace. I scanned the paper's watermark under blacklight. Embedded micro-tracking filament. It was a surveillance document in disguise. The second I opened it, they knew I had received it. But the mistake they made, one they always made, was underestimating how closely I had studied this playbook before it was ever deployed. That night, I reactivated the off-grid hub I'd buried 2 years ago on my property's north edge. It ran on solar and had a dedicated uplink separate from every known tower in the area. Through it, I pulled satellite overheads from classified channels. My home lit up in infrared, surrounded by markers, heat signatures buried into the tree line, at least 4 devices recording, plus an odd pulsating ping near the neighborhood clubhouse that didn't match any commercial equipment. I triangulated the frequency. Military-grade field relay, cloaked under the signature of a power junction box. That was the final proof. This wasn't a rogue HOA leader with delusions of grandeur. This was sanctioned. Someone had authorized Maplewood Pines as a live behavioral zone, using Karen as the face, but pulling strings from much higher up. Then came the night the power went out. Not a blackout, a kill switch. My house went dark precisely at 1:03 a.m., all at once, while every other home in the block remained lit. I checked the breaker, intact. Backup generator, disabled. My cameras? Disconnected, not by surge, but by command. Seconds later, motion triggers on the east perimeter went off in silent alarm. Multiple contacts, slow movement, not charging in, but surrounding. I pulled up thermal overlays through the hub screen. 7 figures, each moving with practice formation, not just HOA vests this time, but dark tactical gear. They weren't here to argue compliance. They were here to extract. I didn't run. I initiated what I called the hollow shift, fake occupancy indicators, noise playback loops, decoy movement shadows cast onto curtains. They breached my garage first, using a crowbar on the side door, then swept through in silence. I watched from beneath the crawl space hatch as they moved with precision. Radio silence, sweep patterns. One even checked under the kitchen island for hidden access. They were methodical, efficient, but they weren't expecting countermeasures. As they reached the basement, I triggered the scatter lights, strobe pulses timed to disrupt inner ear balance and destroy night vision. Within seconds, 2 were on the floor, and the others staggered back, radios finally clicking as someone called for Phase 4 fallback. I recorded everything, every movement, every word. They weren't HOA at all. They were part of a private enforcement network listed under a shell name I recognized. Civic Harmony Division, a post-Fed reorganization group specializing in psychological containment. It was Black Ops bureaucracy turned neighborhood nightmare. Karen had given him ground. My resistance had turned into a test. I followed the ones who fled. Their van, parked 3 blocks down, was unmarked, but my tracker, planted earlier on their relay box, sent me coordinates in real time. They didn't head for a precinct. They drove into a private warehouse just outside county lines. I parked downwind, climbed the hill behind it, and scoped the entrance through thermal goggles. More than just the 7 inside. Dozens. A full team operating like a covert agency with cubicles and warboards. And on the central screen, a floor plan of my home. With timestamps. With habits. With psychological notes. My old bureau profile marked as active resistance potential. But the worst part wasn't the intel. It was the list under it. Other names, other homeowners across other neighborhoods, tagged with relocation phases and projected resistance quotients. This wasn't a one-time operation. It was a national rollout. Karen was the spark, the test case. I was the stressor designed to measure failure. But even they hadn't anticipated the full backlash. By noon the next day, their site was wiped. Gone. A ghost. Only the footage I recorded proved it ever existed. My neighbor, Mr. Jensen, had disappeared. House empty, blinds drawn, car abandoned 2 blocks away. Then I got a text from a secure line I hadn't used in years. It simply read, "Check your attic." I rushed back, scanned for traps, climbed the pull-down ladder, and there it was, an old tin box that hadn't been there yesterday. Inside were documents, printed maps, radio logs, and a red folder marked with a label I hadn't seen since 2014. Opal Rift, Tier 1 Containment Scenarios. This was the original pilot program. My signature was on one of the drafts. They weren't just using my playbook. They were using my handwriting. Let me know when you're ready for Section 4, where everything will explode into the final confrontation and twist. The plan revealed, the real enemy unmasked, and the ending delivered with full intensity. The attic folder confirmed what I had only suspected until now. I was not just the test subject, I was the baseline. Opal Rift had been a theoretical framework meant for stabilizing insurgent pockets abroad without using conventional force, built around the principle of social pressure, environmental conditioning, and phase behavioral rewiring. It was never meant to be used on domestic soil. But here it was, active in suburbia, wearing the skin of an HOA. Karen wasn't the leader. She was the interface. Her clipboard, her rules, her enforcers, they were only surface-level props for a much deeper structure. The maps inside the folder outlined a spiderweb of pilot zones across the country, all low-profile neighborhoods with recent turnover, local enforcement bought or blackmailed, and compliance metrics tracked through anonymous community surveys. Each zone had a subject labeled R4 Resistance, and every single R subject had prior military, intelligence, or law enforcement background. They weren't just testing control, they were testing pushback, and I had pushed hard enough to trigger their failsafe. That same night, I received a second flash drive, delivered by drone, dropped into my backyard like a threat wrapped in silence. I plugged it in, gloves on, firewalls active, and watched as a single file opened automatically. A video, high resolution, timestamped 26 hours earlier. It showed a briefing room, rows of chairs, a large screen, and at the front stood a woman in civilian dress. Karen, not in pastel pink, not in HOA gear, but in dark navy, her tone clinical and composed. She presented slides with names, locations, psychological profiles, and under each one was a tag. Relocation, phase pending. She spoke about resistance vectors, subject containment, digital isolation, and psychological rerouting. She referenced me directly, called me a complication that had exposed phase for vulnerability. But her tone never wavered. She believed in the mission. In the audience, faces I recognized from the warehouse, but also one I hadn't expected, my old bureau handler. He sat in the front row, no expression, nodding occasionally, a file open in his lap. My heart didn't race. It froze, because I realized I was never off the grid. My exit from the bureau wasn't a retirement. It was a redeployment, wrapped in a cover story I had been too tired to question. The next 24 hours were a blur of movement. I emptied caches, burned trail markers, activated dead drops. I contacted former allies, some still in, some far out, scattered across agencies and continents. A few responded. Most didn't. Some replies were scrambled. One was intercepted. The walls were tightening. Then, just after sunset, the final sign arrived. The pavement at the end of my driveway had been marked. Not with chalk this time, but with thermal ink, an arrow pointing inward, and a timestamp. 2 o'clock. They weren't going to send fake officers or clipboard patrols this time. They were coming in clean, silent, and final. This was an extraction order. But they didn't know that I had already invited company of my own. At exactly 1:59 a.m., the sky over Maplewood Pines turned from silence to storm. Low-flying drones, not mine, blanketed the area with frequency jammers and thermal fog. A tactical van rolled down the block with no headlights, blacked out and armored. It wasn't local law enforcement. It was something deeper, an off-book response team from inside an agency that officially no longer existed. I had called in a favor no one ever collects unless they plan not to make it out clean. The team entered with precision, coordinated from a mobile console built to intercept comms before they reached any outside relay. As expected, Karen's team breached the perimeter just moments later, a mix of private contractors and deep sleeper operatives dressed in civilian tactical gear. They moved in silence, using hand signals, expecting to find me asleep or running. Instead, they walked into a live operation. My fail-safes lit up the yard like a trap. The moment they crossed the boundary, counter-surveillance programs activated across public networks. Every phone in the neighborhood received a silent alert. Every smart doorbell started recording. Their stealth advantage vanished. They were no longer ghosts. They were criminals caught mid-act. Inside the command van, my contact initiated the live feed. It was broadcast to 3 locations: federal oversight, a major news outlet secure drop, and a congressional review server. Everything they had tried to keep buried was going wide. Karen's face, her directives, her false authority, it was all on tape. Her fake citations, the staged compliance notices, the psychological warfare, everything had been documented with timestamps, voice logs, and institutional sign-offs. But the true twist didn't come until they stormed Karen's home hours later and found a hidden server rack buried beneath her foundation. Inside, encrypted files detailed something darker, a full list of Phase 5 candidates. Not resistant subjects, but children. Gifted, nonconformist, flagged for early behavioral molding. The program hadn't just planned to silence threats. It was going to shape futures. By dawn, Karen had been detained. Not by local law, but by federal marshals under sealed warrants. My old handler? Gone. Burned clean. His office emptied, files shredded, all contacts scrubbed. The agency denied knowledge, called it a rogue field experiment. But I knew better. I always had. Opal Rift was never shut down. It was simply renamed, repackaged, and distributed through quiet little communities like mine. And while they've been watching me, I've been watching them back, setting traps not just for defense, but for exposure. The cleanup came fast. News spun the story as a strange cult like HOA gone wrong. The Bureau disavowed all ties. But the files were out there now. And I made sure copies landed in the hands of the right people. Maplewood Pines went silent again. For now, I stayed. Not because it was safe, but because I knew what was coming next. The final file on that last drive was labeled only with 3 words: Next Zone Activated. And below it, GPS coordinates for a place in Oregon. The pattern was moving. But now, so was the resistance.